In the first module, we saw that immediately upon turning to this view that knowledge is true opinion, Socrates / Plato raises this difficulty, namely that this view about what it is to perceive, taking a sensory experience and then making a judgment based upon your knowledge of the essential nature of various categories, that doesn't seem to allow for you to make false or incorrect judgments. If you know that a triangle is a three-sided enclosed planar figure, then either the thing that you're looking at in fact satisfies that definition, it has those properties, has that essence, or it doesn't. And so it looks like this view only allows you to know things, and that it doesn't allow for false opinion. And this is the problem that Plato has, and he frames it through Socrates by talking about, look, either you know something or you don't. Either you have knowledge of the essential nature of something and can use it to categorize and make a judgment, or you don't. If you do, it doesn't seem like you could get it wrong. If you don't, it doesn't seem like you're categorizing at all. So either you're correct or you've got nothing. And this seems to be the problem. So the first view that's offered up is the notion that to have a false opinion is to think of something that it is not, or at least not what we think it is. And so the idea here is, look, either we have the form or we don't. When we have a false judgment, when we come to make a categorization that isn't a adequate or correct categorization, it's because we make a judgment on the basis of something we don't have. That is, our knowledge of its appropriate category. But this doesn't look like a very promising theory. And we've noticed throughout the dialogue as we've been reading through it, the Greeks had a real problem with trying to understand nothingness, emptiness. It metaphysically made no sense to them. Their number system, for instance, doesn't have a zero. All throughout the dialogue, you see Plato rehearsing problems about non-existence, about nothing. And so this response to this view isn't at all surprising to us. Look, to think of that which is not is to think of nothing. Nothing does not exist, hence thinking of nothing is to have no opinion, which is not to think at all. And so this first view, that false opinion of thinking is thinking of that which is not, that just cannot work, says Plato, because that would involve us thinking about things that don't exist, that can't happen. The next view that the discussants entertain is this idea of false opinion as heterodoxy. That is, false opinion consists in judging something in a way that's contrary to or different from an acknowledged standard. So in other words, you have a concept, you have an essential nature that you know, and you misapply it to some object. The idea here is that false opinion results from switching one real object for another in one's mind, having a perception and miscategorizing that perception. So in this way, false opinion will arise in thought. Again, the discussants reject this view, and they reject this view for largely the reasons that caused them to venture into thinking about how false opinion could arise. Namely, the view that the discussants have been advocating about the nature of perception, where you're making perceptual judgments by categorizing the experiences that you're having in reference to concepts, categories, essential natures, universals. And so they say, look, on this view, if you have a standard, you're definitely going to know whether or not it applies. So you're never going to pull up by accident your Theodorus standard and then apply it to Theaetetus because you meant to bring up your Theaetetus standard. You pull up that standard. This is what it is to be Theodorus. There's no mistaking that for this is what it is to be a Theaetetus. And because there's no mistake about what concept, what universal, what essential nature you're using, there can't be any misapplication of that essential nature to the perception, thinking that it's some different essential nature. So I go, well, maybe we can make this work somehow. Let's see if we can't come up with some story about how memory and categorization work that allow for this misapplication. And so the first view that they come up with is this metaphorical theory about the nature of the mind and how this theory about perceptual categorization works. And that theory is the ball of wax theory. So they offer up this sort of different theory of the mind, a sort of physical version of that big head animation that we used in the first lecture. The idea here is that your knowledge of categories, the forms that you have, the universals that you have, the essential natures that you have, they're like impressions in a ball of wax. And when a sensation comes in, it's like an object. And you match that object to the impression that best fits it. And that's how categorization works. So it's a lot like those games that little children play where you take the star shape or you take the square shape and you stick it into the star hole on a board, or you stick it into the square hole on the board. You're matching the perception to the object, filling in that hole or that depression in the ball of wax. And so the idea here is, well, maybe when you have a false opinion, you take that perception and you put it in the wrong hole. You take a square peg and you put it in a round hole, for instance. But that very metaphor suggests the problem that they think they're going to have with this.